Here's a question for you folks. Can we say we've really had a JavaScript conference if we don't include some live coding in the lineup? I don't think we can. But thankfully, our next speaker is here to tick that box with some style. Taken to the stage. Next up at the 2021 CityJS conference is Natalia, all the way from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Natalia is a staff front-end engineer at GitLab as well as a core team member of Vue.js. In this talk, Natalia is going to be showcasing the Composition API, which is part of Vue 3, and Natalia will be doing so by live coding against a set of APIs, looking to match them based upon those which are selected by a spinning wheel. Very fancy stuff, Natalia. If you have any questions for Natalia which crop up over this talk, please do make sure you join us for the Q&A session, which will be starting straight after the talk finishes, as well as post along on Twitter using the hashtag CityJS2021 and keep those comments rolling in on YouTube, folks. But for now, Natalia, it is my honor, privilege and pleasure to hand the stage over to you.
Hello everyone, happy to see you at CityJS conference. Today here I'm representing Vue.js core team and I'm going to speak about one of the main features of Vue 3, which is the Composition API. And this talk is built upon a famous quote of Linus Torvalds, who said, "Talks are cheap, show me the code." That's why a very short part of this presentation gonna be slides with some introductory explanation of what Composition API is, and then we're going to dive into a long and painful live coding, demonstrating how we can use and why we can use a Composition API. And when I'm speaking about why, this is a really important problem because I've seen multiple times people asking the same question. Why do we need this new API at all? We were happy with Vue 2 and Options API, which was a previously main one. What problem are we going to solve with a new API? And I will try to answer this in this talk. My name is NATALIA TEPLUHINA and I'm Vue.js core team member. I'm responsible for writing Vue.js documentation. I work as staff front-end engineer at GitLab, and there we're using Vue as our front-end framework. So I definitely have some experiences with complicated code base where some specific solutions are needed. And I'm also a Google developer expert in web technologies. So if you happen never hear about what Vue Composition API is, in a nutshell, this is a new API that allows us to create a standalone reactive state of properties outside of Vue components, because previously any reactive state was baked into Vue components or instances. With a Composition API, we can create it outside in a simple JavaScript files using methods such as ref here, which creates a reactive object with a single property value, and this value is reactive, which means when we change it, our application is going to render anything depending on this property. And obviously we can use this standalone reactive state in our Vue components. So we can call them in a specific function called setup, and we can use this in the Vue component template. We can abstract reactive state, which means that we can have a pieces of logic with reactive properties somewhere in the JavaScript file, and then we can expose it as a composition function or composable, which we will be building in the live coding part of the talk. We can export them there, then import them to the Vue component and use there. This is still not an explanation of why this API is useful and why we need it as an addition to the previously existing Options API in the Vue. And the answer is we need it for flexible and universal logic composition. First, let's take a look at flexible. In Vue 2, we had a tool for abstracting a logic and separating it, which was mixing. And mixing is just an object that contains the same properties that Vue component can contain. So here, for example, we have login and password as a reactive state of the component in the mixing, and we have a method to submit a form. But there is an issue. Mixing is not as flexible. What if I want to have a dynamic property here? What if I want also to pass a form ID somehow to the mixing? This wouldn't be possible. I would need to create this property in the Vue component. And mixing itself is not flexible at all. This is not a function we can pass parameters to. So mixing is not matching a flexible criteria. Speaking about universal, in Vue 2, we can also leverage renderless components with scope slot. What is this in a nutshell? Basically, we create a form wrapper component here that contains a slot. And via this slot, we can expose the properties of form wrapper back to the parent component where we're using it. So this is the only way in Vue you can communicate child component properties back to parent. Because Vue has unidirectional data flow. Usually all the properties are passed from parent to the child. Scope slot allows us to have them and vice versa in an opposite direction. So here, for example, we have a child component that exposes 3 different properties back to the parent. And in the parent, in the slot of this component, we can use our form that leverages login, password, and submit form. And this is definitely more flexible than mixing because I can pass a prop to this child component. And this will be a parameter. So it's flexible, but is it universal? For example, what if I need to use the login exposed by form wrapper outside of it? Unfortunately, this is not possible because template is runtime based. So login, password, and submit form are only available inside of form wrapper, not the outside. I cannot expose login anywhere in the template. I cannot use login in the different reactive options of the component, not in data, not in computed, not anywhere. That's why the Composition API was created as a good way to have a flexible, universal logic abstraction. And right now we will try to build an example where we're using Composition API from scratch to see how we can reuse this logic for different cases. To demonstrate this, I'm going to build a composable that will be working with different APIs. And as a first one, we're going to use cat API because why not? I like cats, so let's just use them. And for the rest of the APIs, we are going to have a wheel that will give us 2 more random APIs, and I'm going to spin it right now. So the first API we're going to use here is dog API. Nice, because we have cats, why not having dogs as well? And the second one will be Rick and Morty API. This one is REST and GraphQL, and I'm going to use a GraphQL version of it, just because it's more fun, and it will show that our composable is flexible enough to consume both REST and GraphQL APIs. So let's start with our application. Let me run the server. And here we have nothing fancy. Right now it's just an input field and search button. So let's start building our application with Cats API. So First thing I want to have is a query, which will be a search term for our API. So there will be const query, which is equal to ref, and initial value of this ref is an empty string. And of course, we need to import ref from view. And important thing that we need to return everything from setup function to use it in the template. I'm going to add vModel here, which creates two-way binding for the query property and input field. And next step, I need some result that will be returned from the API call. And again, this is an initial value of an empty string. And finally, we are going to have a method call API, which will perform an Axios call. That's why I'm uncommenting Axios. So this will be Axios get, and let's go and copy paste the URL. This is displaying an image of a certain cat breed. And instead of breed ID here, I'm going to have query value. And this is an important moment because ref, as I already said, creates an object from the primitive. This object contains a single property called value. That's why we're accessing query value here. However, Vue is smart enough to make an automatic unwrapping. That's why here in the template, we don't need value anymore. But within the setup function, we will still be operating with value. So let's make this function async. And we will have const res is equal awaiting for the call. Let's console log the rest to see what we have. And let's return result here, even though it's empty right now. So in the browser, oh yeah, I need also to return a call API. And I will call it on button click. So let's search for Bengal cat. And you can see that we have some result where is data, which is an array. And I want to show an image, which is a URL. So res data 0 URL. Okay, let's search again. Good, I have a URL now and I can start displaying it. So I will add a div here with an image where source is result and alt is some random image. And instead of consoling log, I will say that result value is equal to res data 0 URL. And also, I only want to show this div if we have a result. Okay, search. Nice, we have Bengal cat. So currently we have a very simple logic. Let's make it complex a bit more to be more real life. And in real life, when you have an API calls, most likely you're going to have some error handling and you're going to display some loading state. So let's make it a bit more complicated. So we will have a loading, which is false by default. And we will have an error, which is false by default as well. I just want to show a generic error message every single time something goes wrong. And to handle this, we will need a try-catch block. So try-catch, please. And also there will be finally. So in try, I'm going to have my API call. In catch, I will display an error, but also I want to handle my loading state here. So here loading value is true, and error, if we had any previous error, we need to nullify it here, is false. In the catch hook, we say that error value is true. And then finally, we want to set our loading value back to false. And let's display it somehow in our template. So here, if we have an error, and this will simply make the text red, we'll say, oops, something went wrong. And here I want also to have a block that shows us a message about loading. And if loading is false, we will show a result. And of course, we need to return loading and error from our setup function. Okay, let's try to see what's going on here. So there is a loading state and it shows us a cat. But what if something goes wrong? Let's add one here. Something went definitely wrong because we have this error with our own API. So here we have a piece of logic to handle an API call. And you can see that even with the simplest options, just loading error and result, it's already is bloated a bit. And I definitely don't want to write it every single time I'm doing API calls anywhere, and especially if I'm doing different APIs. I want it to be abstracted somehow, but I want it also to keep reactive state. So I will create a composable for this. Let's call it useAPI.js. And we want to import ref here for sure. And export a function, useAPI. Let's just copy paste everything we have from here and try to modify it a bit. So I want my composable to be responsible for all this reactive state for sure, but I don't want it to only fetch data from the cat API. Maybe I'm not even going to use access. What I want is my composable will call a function called getResults, the function that I will pass from the component. So the way of fetching data is unknown to my composable. It only cares of getting some results with a method provided by parent and handling the loading, error, and result values in sync. So for this, I will pass getResults. And instead of doing this, I will just call my getResults. But getResults should rely on my reactive state. So getResults function should accept a parameter that it will use in the URL for the API call. And I can simplify this a bit because I just want to assign whatever getResults return to my result. Because different APIs can shape the response differently, so this is not a responsibility of my composable. Let's go back to the component and remove things we don't need here. We don't need refs anymore. We will still need to return everything to use it in the template. So I want to have all these data to be returned by use API. And I need to import use API, of course. Use API from composables, use API. And here, I need to pass an async function that, you remember, should have one argument. I will call it query. So I remember this should be a query. And here I will be awaiting for the response from the API. And I remove value here because we already passed query value. We don't need to do it one more time. We have already unwrapped this in the composable. And I will return my res data0 URL. And I can remove all the call API from here. So let's go back and check if this works. Again, Bengal cat, everything is fine. So you can say that component code shrinked a lot. It's way shorter, and everything is happening in the composable. All the magic is here. So, okay, we have done this for the cat API. So let's make it visible. So this is cat API. But what if I want to use a different API? Will my composable still work with two APIs we got on the wheel? I will comment my cat API and go check the next one, which is dog API. And here we are going to check the breeds list. So we will again be fetching a picture of a certain dog breed. And I will copy paste the URL string because this is what I want to do. And actually, I will copy paste this piece of code first. So here we are going to have dog API. I will add the same piece of code and comment this one. And again, where is my URL? Here we go. So here we'll go the dog breed. It's often pincher, but in our case, it's just a query. And I'm not sure what this URL is going to return. So I will go again with console log driven development and just make a console log res. And I'm going to search for husky. Something went wrong, obviously, because response is shaped differently. So we have data and we have message, and that's it. So instead of returning res data 0 URL, we will just return res data message. And let's try our luck again with husky. Okay, this works. This gives us an image of husky, or I don't know, Shiba. So dog API is working as well. Let's copy paste this again. And let's go with Rick and Morty API. And this one is going to be more complex. I'll comment dog API as well. And let's go check Rick and Morty. So closing dogs, closing cats, going for Rick and Morty API. And this one is Graphql API, which might sound a bit more complicated because most of people associate Graphql API with a dedicated Graphql client, for example, Apollo. But in fact, we can simply fetch data from Graphql API using POST requests, and it's not any kind specific. It's just a simple POST request that has a proper body. And here, as you can see, I'm already fetching a list of characters that have a name Rick. So I'm going to simply copy paste the GraphQL query and work with it in my component. So for Rick and Morty API, I will need to have one more constant. I will call it characters query. And this is a string. And you can see that currently we have a filter with name Rick. So here instead, I want to pass a parameter, name, which is a string, and here I will be using it. This weird syntax, if you never worked with GraphQL, means that I want to pass a dynamic variable to my query in the post request body, and GraphQL will adjust it. So whatever we pass as a name will be added here as a dynamic variable. And I need to change my code slightly because currently we're going to go with GraphQL and this will be Axios post. And as a URL, we will use Rick and Morty GraphQL URL. And here we're going to specify the body. And in the body, we will have a query, which is characters query. And we need to pass variables where name is our query we will type in the input. And let's make a console log res to see what is going to go wrong. So Rick, I'm searching, and as you can see, my API call was successful enough. I have some data, and data contains an array of characters. It contains results. So data, characters, results, 0, image. Okay, data, characters, results, 0, image. Let's hope everything gonna be fine. Rick, search, something went wrong. Again, oh, so it's data, data, characters, results. Okay. Rick, search. And we have Rick and Morty. And we have Morty as well. So even though it required a bit more work here with characters query and shaping the response differently, you can see that our composable was universal enough to handle this case for us. And unfortunately, with all the previous forms of logic abstractions in Vue, which would be mixins or renderless components, this would be definitely more complicated to do. And I really like how short and clear the thing here is. The only thing you need to learn is how to create reactive properties with Vue, and rest is pretty much intuitive. Thank you so much for listening to the talk.
Natalia, thank you very much for that super interesting talk on the Vue 3 Composition API. I'm sure everybody at home took a hell of a lot away from that talk. If you enjoyed that session, or even if you didn't, please do join me in giving Natalia a huge round the world round of applause. If that talk has left your head spinning with more questions and answers, please do join us for the Q&A session on GatherTown, which will be starting any moment now. Natalia will be attempting to put the pin in the wheel that is your spinning brain. Don't forget, let us know what you thought of that talk and how you are using the Vue 3 Composition API over on Twitter using the hashtag CityJS2021, as well as keep those comments rolling in on YouTube. Natalia, thank you very much for an amazing talk. Vue 3 to the CityJS stage. What an amazing thing. How did that talk go for you?
Oh, it was nice, but you know that sometimes it's it's really hard to listen to your own voice. So yeah.
It certainly is. But pre-recorded makes it a lot easier for you on the day, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely yes.
Excellent. So we've got a hot topic here. Vue 3 has recently come out. Recently come out or just about to come out?
Recently. It was in September. It's not that recently.
Look, this has been a long year. That's recently in my book.
Oh yeah.
You know, every day's the same. How are the migrations going? That's what's kind of interesting me. There's loads of libraries and frameworks that rely on Vue. Have you made migration super easy this time, or has it been a bit of a pain in the backside?
Oh, this is definitely a pain right now. Now I'm speaking from the perspective, not a Vue.js core team member only, but also an engineer in a huge company that uses Vue with a huge enterprise boilerplate with all the legacy code and whatnot. And the issue right now is Vue 3 is stable. The core migrated, it's like everything is fine, but we have an ecosystem. This means we have all these shiny dependencies, all the libraries, all the small things and big things like component libraries. And for us, the issue is we're using Bootstrap Vue as a component library, and it's not close to migration. I think most of major libraries target Quota 3 for release. I can say this is for Nuxt. This is main SSR solution for Vue, as well as most of component libraries like Vuetify, Bootstrap Vue, and something like this. And this kind of slows down the migration. Also DevTools, and we know how important DevTools are for any developer. So DevTools are a bit behind. They are still in beta, I think. Rest of things are more or less good, but migration is, I think it's tricky for any company, and we're working on a migration tool to make it easier. But so far, it's just manual work.
Okay. But that's a good problem to have. You know, there's so many companies out there who are adopting Vue and are using Vue. That must be really good from a team perspective, you know, the core team working on this. You must be over the moon that you have this problem to solve.
I am, but for me, it's also like all the reports to the documentation say, hey, this is not corrected. Yeah, this is like additional work. But I can't wait for the moment when we will be able to migrate as a company, because as I was showing these abstracting things, this is actually what I'm waiting here at GitLab, because we have so many things where we have mixins, like deep nested mixins, which is an absolute nightmare in terms of architecture. So I really want to implement all the composables around, and I cannot right now.
Oh, sad face. One day, hopefully, you will be able to very, very soon. Hey, and I guess you know the right people to push that through as quick as possible.
It doesn't work this way.
Doesn't it not? Do you not sort the team's needs out first and then move on to the community? Is that not how it works?
You know that my own team at GitLab is looking at me like, can't you do things to make it easier? No, I can't, people. It's like, it doesn't work this way.
No. Never mind. Hey, we touched on community just then, the Vue.js community. I think for me, looking at all of the different communities that have built up around frameworks and libraries and the other tools that we use, Vue.js has always been a shining example of how it can be done well. It seems to be a very involved community, a community that cares a lot about how things move forward. What do you kind of attribute that to? Is it because you've done something different? Was it how Evan set things up at day one? What do you put that down to?
I'm walking a really like dangerous ground here, because I'm
Oh,
assuming things about other frameworks, but I
okay.
will. And I think partly it's because this is not a job. Core team is not working. You're not hired by a major company to work on the framework, which doesn't mean that people who are for Facebook or Google are less passionate, but it definitely changes a mindset a bit when you're working for something and when you're just volunteering to do something. And I believe the latter kind of made all of us very open-minded. And also, I'm not sure how the process works for React team or Angular team. I have no idea how people join them. But for Vue, it's like every single active contributor in the community has a chance to join and be a core team member, and they know it. And I think this kind of blurs the border between being entitled core member and just an active contributor, because it's completely the same. And we feel like contributors, not entitled and very open-minded mostly.
Okay. I'm going to put the cat amongst the pigeons now, if that's a phrase you're familiar with. And say hello to the cat, by the way. Um, we spoke to Kitson Kelly, who's been employed now to work full time on the Dino runtime.
Mm-hmm.
Is there kind of a desire eventually to move towards paid contributors for Vue.js, do you think? Or is that something that's we're going to keep it as community, everybody gets involved, we're going to keep it very democratic that way?
So I think we have a few people working full time, first of all,
Okay.
but this is not out of paid. Like we don't have bounty issues. We're not paid like this. This is just contributions through Open Collective and GitHub sponsors and Patreon.
Yeah.
And I know that a few people working full time for the Open Collective money. I think Eduardo Posva, who is an author of Vue Router, is working like this, and a maintainer of Vue CLI as well. So it happens. But again, this won't require people to pay in any way for like bounties.
No, of course not. Of course not. That's the community aspect. You can't lose that, really, can you? And I've got to ask, how are things at GitLab at the moment? Is everything all rosy? Those pull requests coming in, so to speak?
And I should I wave to my manager watching the talk?
Yeah, do it. Hi, manager.
No, it's definitely really interesting right now at GitLab. I enjoy working there, even during the lockdown.
Yeah,
It's a big thing that were working remotely before,
yeah.
and we're still continuing. And it's funny because people say, "Oh, you're lucky because nothing has changed in a company that works remotely," which is completely untrue because for everyone it has changed. I mean, mental health, everything. And I really like what GitLab is doing. We have 1 day per month, which we call Family and Friends Day. But basically, that's like for mental health, then we are not working. This is like enforced holiday for the company, just because we kind of know that it's hard to work during the lockdown. This is not the remote work we used to have. And just in case if you are working in the company that switched to remote, there are high chances this is not how remote works. Because remote work and quarantined remote work, two different things for real. It's way more fun when you're not on lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked, I call it distributed rather than remote because remote makes me feel isolated, but distribute makes me feel like part of a team. But I would always pop up at coffee shops or when I'm at a conference, go to a restaurant and do some work from there. And that is remote work. Being able to work from a beach is my definition of remote work. And we just can't do that at the moment. So this is distributed work beta as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned. And hopefully we'll go to release candidate as soon as lockdowns finish. But it's a great opportunity for companies. It obviously worked well for GitLab beforehand, and hopefully it will work well for GitLab afterwards. And I'm wondering what you're going to take personally. What kind of things do you think you'll take from the switch that has happened around remote work for you into post-lockdown life? Is there anything that you've enjoyed from this new?
In the lockdown, I see you're really optimistic about things. Like we're in lockdown, but there must be a thing that you enjoy.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely, like, if we don't speak about only work, I definitely have more walks around right now because previously you were walking somewhere, right? Like to the beach, to the coffee shop, somewhere. Right now it's just walking around, and I definitely enjoy this.
It's yeah. For me, it's not being stuck at home. It's the not being allowed out of home. That's the problem, for that walk.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Giz, can I get a time check at the window, please? I've lost track of what time we started. But until that comes through, I have another question for you. And these are questions that we're putting to all of the audience, all of the speakers throughout the conference. And these are rapid fire questions. So quick answers, please. And these are the important questions. First up, tabs or spaces?
Spaces.
Spaces. Now, is that a thing that's dictated? I'm interested now. Is that something that is common across the entire Vue community? That you?
No, we don't enforce anything, but for me it was spaces a long time.
Okay, it's the right answer. It is definitely the right answer. Anybody using tabs is a little bit evil on the inside, I personally think. But, you know. I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to put it anyway. If you could only use one framework or library for the rest of your life, would it be Angular, React, or Vue?
Why didn't you bring Svelte? This is discrimination.
Svelte. We can put Svelte in there if you
Or
want.
like
Svelte.
Backbone, Knockout,
Backbone,
whatever
Knockout.
fancy things. But I mean, you know the answer. I cannot break the policy about being Vue core team member. Imagine if I said that I would prefer React. It would be nice.
I think you should say it and see what happens.
It's so tempting. It's like I would work with React.
Front end or back end?
Both.
Both?
Can I have both?
You can full stack. That is definitely an option.
I mean, full stacks don't exist. It's always more front-endy or back-endy full stack, but
yeah, I kind of argue that everyone's a full stack developer, but you lean one way or the other more or less, right?
yeah.
Tabby cats or ginger cats?
Tabby.
Correct answer again. And finally, apples or bananas?
Bananas.
Bananas. Correct answer again. You've got all of these correct. You're just amazing. What can I say? So we have about 60 seconds left, so it just leaves me enough time to say thank you very much, Natalia, for delivering an amazing talk at this year's CityJS Online, and for joining me for this Q&A. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's been nice catching up with you again.
Thank you for listening to the talk, for inviting me, and for this amazing chat as well.
Excellent. If you are watching along at home, the next talk will be happening on the main stage, but don't forget to visit those sponsor booths and try and win yourself some prizes. I think the home office makeover is still up for grabs on the Contentful stand, so go over and check that out. Once again, Natalia, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.